Yes, hello. My name is Steve Wittrig. I'm going to talk with you today about using ammonia as a base for a competitive zero carbon economy. As I say, with apologies to Daniel Jorgen, who wrote the prize during the 20th century about oil. In the 21st century, one of the prizes is zero carbon fuel. Ammonia actually contains no carbon in the molecule. So when it's burned, it releases no carbon dioxide at all. It's also the second largest synthesized industrial chemical in the world since it's fertilizer, and probably half the nitrogen atoms in everybody's body has gone through a Haber-Bosch plant. So it's a very ubiquitous chemical that's scalable from global chemical to global energy proportions. Just to give an idea, the current capacity of ammonia in the world is about 1/50th of our total energy use. So that's something that's easily conceivable, could be scaled up over time. It has a century-long history of large-scale handling and use, shipping around the world by pipelines, ships, barges, trucks, you name it. So we know how to handle it and know how to use it safely and that sort of thing. It's competitive in energy pricing to current fuels, actually, and we'll talk more about that later. It can also be used in transportation and in power generation and internal combustion engines and turbines and boilers, fuel cells. It's a very flexible fuel. In terms of as a hydrogen carrier, liquid ammonia actually contains about 50% by volume more hydrogen than liquefied hydrogen, and is certainly much cheaper and much safer. It is an inherently clean fuel with regard to sulfur emissions, known as SOx, carbon monoxide, which is a poison, smoke, the kind of stuff you see coming out from a diesel bus or whatever, and CO2. And I mentioned NOx last because that's nitrogen oxides. It is just as easy to control, actually much easier to control NOx from ammonia combustion as from any fuel, from natural gas, certainly from coal, because that's basically a function of temperature, and you can design the engines appropriately. And it's much easier to control anyway, because when you make NOx in a power plant or in a diesel engine, the way you reduce that in after treatment is you use ammonia and you react the NOx with ammonia. So you already have the ammonia there, and it's very easy to control NOx down to essentially zero. It holds promise as a low or no carbon production in terms of producing it. The way most of the ammonia is made in the world is from natural gas. And of course, that does produce CO2, but 2/3 of the CO2 is produced actually as part of the process is pure CO2, and therefore sequestration ready or ready to sell for enhanced oil recovery or geothermal. To capture the rest of the CO2 that's in that process actually requires just a 15% premium on top of not capturing the CO2. So it is, if you've got $150 production cost for the ammonia, then it would be up to $170, which is something that can be handled easily. It enables distributed power generation and smart grid applications. And the last point here is it appears to be within easy reach of through optimization of production, use, and safety regulations around the world. Ammonia is NH3 when combined with oxygen, essentially makes nitrogen and water. Basically, it's humidified air that you could exhaust directly into your baby's nursery. The average price over the last 25 years is $300 a ton. It goes up and down in a oligopoly market, basically between $150 and up to $600 a ton. But on an average, that's equivalent to less than $2 a gallon gasoline, less than $2 a gallon diesel, and about $14 per million BTU LNG, which we can get to later. The lowest cost of ammonia production today, actually for on-purpose modern plants with $1 per MMBTU gas, which is what's the required cost for gas to put into LNG, front end of that supply chain is half of that. So that would be less than $1 a gallon gasoline and diesel, and less than $10 a million BTU of LNG, but much, much easier and much cheaper to supply to the world in terms of infrastructure and that sort of thing. It can be produced from zero carbon hydrogen. So if you want to make ammonia, you need nitrogen from the air, which is very easy to get, and you need hydrogen. That can be supplied from reforming reforming methane or coal, or it can be formed from hydrogen from electrolysis and that sort of thing, which is currently more expensive, but also you can get that hydrogen from nuclear or wind or solar or that sort of thing to form zero carbon ammonia from the beginning. Ammonia diesel engines are proven for the last 30 years and essentially equivalent in cost to current engines. And actually you can do a lot of tricks with them, like heat up the ammonia with the exhaust heat and recover that heat and make it into hydrogen, which is a better fuel, so you can do heat recovery from the exhaust. Okay, let's talk about zero carbon ammonia from made from our natural gas that we have, from fracking. When you make ammonia from natural gas, which is the way that almost all of it is made, except in China, it's made from coal. Approximately 2/3 of the CO2 that's made in that process, as part of the process, is made as pure CO2. So it is what's called sequestration ready, or it can be sold to enhanced oil recovery for $30 or $40, $50 a ton as CO2, and it also can be used in large geothermal. So CO2 is actually a very efficient circulation fluid for geothermal, much better than water, but nobody does it because CO2 is too expensive. The other interesting thing to point out here is, and we can't get into all of it, but essentially ammonia, when you make it from methane, if you wanted to capture all of the carbon that goes into the process, you're paying about a 15% premium. So if you're making $150 a ton ammonia, then you can make totally carbon-free ammonia for $165 a ton. And again, just something for further discussion for people that have questions, but it is by far the cheapest way to take our hydrocarbons and make a liquid fuel where you capture all the CO2. Furthermore, when you're pumping that natural gas out of the ground, you're making room to put all the CO2 back if that's the only thing you have to do with it, because CO2 packs about 3 times as efficiently at the same pressure into the hole you just took the methane out of. So you could directly sequester it there, but you'd probably want to sell it for $40 or $50 a ton to
people that desperately that really want to use it for enhanced oil recovery, or maybe in one of these, 5-kilometer wide geothermal technologies and that sort of thing. There's many, many things you can do at large scale with pure CO2 if you've, got the infrastructure to do it. And these kinds of operations would also supply a great deal of experience for regional scale CCUS. So essentially what you can do is you can take the methane out of the ground, make a liquid fuel that is totally carbon free, and we know how to distribute around the world, and to make electricity and even transportation with it, send that off and put the carbon back in the ground, or sell it and even make a lot of money that way. Well, one more thing to say about that. If then you're doing this and you have large regional scale ammonia plants, if you've got a wind farm next to that can supply electrolysis or hydropower or whatever, all of the hydrogen you make can be directly supplied to that plant, and that will be also by far the cheapest way to actually take green electricity and turn it into hydrogen and put it into a transportable fuel. That's much cheaper than trying to do that at the wind farm and whatever, and doing it at a very small ammonia plant. And we'll talk a little bit about neighborhood energy stations. I know I only have about 4 minutes left, so let's get to it. Basically, your neighborhood gasoline station where you fill up your car. What I've done is taken something that would look very much like that, but would store ammonia in underground, very safe, chilled tank, and use that as a fuel for a diesel generator that supports a microgrid. Many of you may or may not know what a microgrid is, but essentially, if you want to take in, solar or wind power or something like that, you have to have something to back that up. If you want, reasonable electricity that's always available. By far, the most common way to do that now is to use a diesel generator. Like you go down to the hardware store and buy a diesel genset to back that up. If you used ammonia in that complex, then that would be a totally carbon-free microgrid that would allow you, once you back these up with a genset, you can use 60 to 70%. You've got it available as solar and wind, as opposed to like 20% if you're trying to use it up or use it without backup. The general complexity of these stations would be less than a gasoline station. It would be single grade, basically hard piped together and run by engineers rather than 300 people coming in and filling up and handling the fuel and that kind of thing. This is essentially what it would look like. So instead of a diesel genset, you would use ammonia. And I won't go through all the technical details of this, but essentially what this would do would allow you to run your own electricity, to reliably be able to, provide that with the right frequencies and right characteristics to the local grid. And it's a very, effective way, already been proven if that's a diesel genset, and basically doing this. One of the advantages of using an ammonia genset for this is the exhaust is very clean, so you can put it anywhere. You can put it in the basement of a tower in the middle of Manhattan or whatever. So that makes it very, very much more amenable to using the half of the energy that's generated by this genset that's not used for electricity, but it's used for heat. So it allows you to, heat water or, use it for heat-driven air conditioning or that kind of thing. I won't go through the upside of this, but basically for island economies that, are run off of diesel now, this would be very good. And ancillary services, so, one of the reasons that microgrids don't work very well is, they don't provide the right kind of electricity. Ammonia, of course, is used as a fertilizer, and so it's already in rural economies all over. We're coming up on 18 minutes, Dave. Is that? Oh well, let me just show a couple of pictures, and then we can get into this. This is essentially posters that I've put together over the years, talking about the flow of what the ammonia economy would look like. This is one of my favorites because it's fairly simple. So if you had big ammonia complexes and you run your trains on that, then that provides transportation, professional, handling of the fuel. You could deliver to ammonia tanks in cities by pipelines or by train all the way between these two. If it was, between two ammonia complexes, you wouldn't be running empty trains back. You'd be running back and forth. You could provide the farm economy and the industrial economy with liquid carbon-free fuel. That's 19 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. I just on this particular graph, I just want to make sure everyone understands that the black smoke coming out of the engine is probably not accurate if it's ammonia. Is that correct?
No, that's with the sunlight background, and that's just the steam. And actually, that's just because that was the cheapest little icon I could find of a.
I just wanted to make sure. Well, thanks very much.
This is in front of a sunset, and so that's just just steam there. That's the only reason.
All right. Well, we do have a few questions for you. The first one is, let's just be clear about the limits of ammonia as a fuel. Is the major constraint or concern around the ability to sequester CO2, or is there something else that should be acknowledged if ammonia is going to be used as a fuel?
Well, first of all, the ability to store CO2 is not a constraint with any sort of 50-year time frame, because there are very large markets to buy reliable CO2 just from enhanced oil recovery. And if you put together an earth battery or geothermal, those facilities produce, 8 cents a kilowatt hour electricity and buy ammonia for $40 a ton and take in 3 million tons a year of CO2. So that's essentially unlimited. And in the last case, as I say, when you're taking the natural gas out, you're making room for putting all the CO2 back of the carbon you put in. But the other basic question to that is, CO2 is, as everyone knows, is not the only reason that we try to go after clean technologies. So if you look around the world at all the pollution that is in third world cities, from dirty diesel from generators and all the the 80% of the world that doesn't have access to clean natural gas, both of which produce much more CO2. Ammonia can be provided to those things, and even if we released all the CO2 from that, we're improving the. First of all, it's lower CO2 than LNG in any case, but it also cleans up and provides energy for the world. So, to the extent we care about people in Africa that are need real electricity and stuff like that, there is no limit.
Okay. All right, so another question. If, well, we understand why manufacturing ammonia as a transportation fuel allows for easier CO2 sequestration than collecting it, the CO2 directly from a gasoline tailpipe. But wouldn't going directly to an electric vehicle be easier?
If you want to spend 3 times as much for your vehicle and wait 5 hours to charge it up, for one thing. The other thing is that we have basically there's there's trillions of dollars of infrastructure in making diesel engines that already sits there. So we don't have to build gigafactories and dig up Chile to provide lithium and that kind of thing to do this. It is first of all, as I say, it's at a scale where you could provide those things without like I say, the lithium or making batteries or all the uncertainties we have around really how long those batteries will last or what their fire potential is and that kind of thing. We know much more and have much more infrastructure and knowledge in place about how internal combustion engines and the delivery of fuel works than we do for electric power vehicles. And everybody who knows about electric vehicles knows in the background that if you're using carbon-based electricity to do that, you're essentially doubling the carbon output because of all the transmission losses and that kind of thing to get the power to your car in any case.
Okay, so we've addressed the EV issue or comparison, but let's think about other fuels that are also being used fairly extensively, and particularly in internal combustion engines, I suppose. Why would ammonia be a better power generation fuel than, say, natural gas?
Okay, well, here's a slide right here. Well, all right. You guys live in the Northeast. You can't build any pipelines to get natural gas into there. And you're starting to have your gas company is telling you can't get a hookup because of the infrastructure to get high pressure gas there. So there's the infrastructure for delivering a liquid fuel. First of all, is much less hard piped. You don't have to build a pipeline. You don't have to take 5 years to get it approved and 5 years to build it and that kind of thing. You can deliver it in by rail or by truck or by pipeline or that sort of thing. And also you can store it on site. So if you look at Aliso Canyon in California, for instance, where they had a large release of natural gas from their high pressure gas caverns that basically, not crippled, but certainly got in the way of a lot of electricity production in Southern California, and they're trying to figure out in California whether they want to have more natural gas storage there. So the storage is much cheaper. You don't have when you have a failure of a pipe that has ammonia in it. First of all, you smell it right away, and it doesn't blow off the roofs of 75 houses in North Boston. So there are lots of potential reasons that do that. You're not exposed to a single source price volatility. If you've got one pipeline delivering your gas, you pay whatever the toll is for whoever's delivering the gas to you. If you're doing ammonia, you can buy it from anybody.
Okay, this is good.
Also, there are no CO2 emissions, by the way.
Right. 2 more questions coming up here, Steve. So the first one is that you mentioned the cost per ton, but how much energy does it require to produce ammonia?
It's basically about
to other fuels.
Okay, so it's basically about 30 million BTU per ton for of gas. In terms of the sort of the energy in versus energy out, the gas that goes in currently about 65% of the energy comes out as liquid ammonia. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't compare unfavorably to the gas that goes in the front end of the supply chain to make LNG and to, put it in $10 billion export facilities and $1 billion ships and ship it across the sea and that kind of thing. Which, for LNG, that is around 85%, but you're also delivering something that can be, efficiently delivered over much wider regions in Africa or China or Eastern Europe or Vermont.
Okay.
Which are apt comparisons, by the way, in terms of the infrastructure those places have for natural gas distribution.
Okay, so the last question, and I just have to be kind of quick about this, but you've painted a fairly favorable picture for ammonia as a fuel. But even if the oil majors, which you would know very well, even if they are not interested, what has stopped some entrepreneurial disruptor somewhere out there from investing in ammonia as a fuel? Why has it not got to market thus far?
A couple of questions. This is a longer.
You have 30 seconds to answer this question.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And so I'm just going to point to this slide. And I'm going to say I have much more extensive experience over 30 years with a similar thing with methanol. And my answer always to that question was the reason methanol didn't work in the U.S. and Europe was the oil companies didn't want it, the car companies didn't want it, and the methanol companies didn't want it. And for all their various reasons, and that's not to cast aspersions, that's just the way things are. These systems all have their own inertia and basically regulatory and business reasons why it's very difficult to change things.
Right.
And they change much faster in China, and that's where methanol took place, was in China, and it's a $200 billion business in China, in case anybody would be surprised.
Right. Steve, thanks very much. We're out of time. We very much appreciate your presentation. We have recorded the session. We will be posting it on the Forum2100 website, along with your slides and backup materials for people if they'd like to explore that. Also, the contact information for those of you who would like to be in touch with Steve to perhaps pursue a discussion with him about this topic or others. Let me also alert you that we are going to have our 9th talk on the 28th of May. That's Tuesday at exactly the same time, 11:30 a.m. New York time, Eastern Daylight. The speaker will be George Markovsky. The topic is going to be small modular nuclear power. A lot has happened within the last 2 to 3 years' time, particularly around liquid fuel nuclear reactors, and a lot of concern and interest in trying to exploit the opportunities for bringing this to market. Thanks very much for joining us. If you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to send us email so that we may respond to you. Thanks again, and enjoy the spring. Thank you, Steve. Talk to you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.